So stand by, and in 3, 2, 1, show calling for conferences and events is without doubt one of the most important parts of the show. But don't get me wrong, every single part of a show is equally important, from the guys that bring in the boxes, to the sound, to the lights, to the performers, to the director. Everyone is equally important, but the show caller has something that's quite unique to do, and that's he brings everything together a little bit like a conductor for an orchestra. So show calling, without doubt, is one of the elements of the show that's very, very important, but quite often the audience never ever get to think about a show caller, and it's just something that's very rarely discussed in the industry. So it gives me great pleasure today to welcome our resident show calling expert, Kate Salberg, all the way from the UK. Kate, it's great to have you here. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for asking me, Tim. I'm good. And it's, gosh, it's early morning here. It's 9:10 and afternoon where you are. Very gloomy here, probably lovely where you are.
Well, yes, I think England is mostly gloomy, which is why I moved to Asia, which is mostly hot. Yeah, and we're coming up to 5 p.m. here, and it's been a very beautiful day, as always, in Asia. So before we get into the topic of show calling, I just thought it'd be great if we can just get to meet Kate. Maybe you can give us a little history of who you are, what you've been doing over the last few years in the industry, because you've been in the industry for 25 years, correct?
I have, but I was in theatre for 25 years before that. So we're looking at a 50-year career here, somebody getting into their ancient years. I did start very young. So my background is theatre. My parents were both in the theatre. My dad was a theatre manager of the old school when there used to be repertory. My mum was an actress. My sister is a company manager. My niece is a theatre director. My brother-in-law is an actor. So it kind of runs it. And my grandfather ran a theatre. So that's where it all started. So I started work in repertory theatre in the early 70s, when there really weren't any training courses. There just wasn't any theatre stage management courses then. And I learned as a student ASM at a repertory in Scotland for 2 years. And I spent about 5 or 6 years working in rep, which is really where you learn your job. And honestly, the happiest, best times, because not so much pressure as when you're in the West End. You're doing it for a local community, you're part of the community. And although they're always wanting national press, it's not really the be all and end all. It's what you're providing as a function. And it's very, very happy times. And that's where I learned the collaboration and the enjoyment of being part of a company, which I still really love. And then I came to London and I fell into a job at the National Theatre in my early 20s. And was there when it first opened for a couple of years. And then I moved eventually into musicals, which is where I stayed. And latterly, I was a Cameron Mackintosh person. And so my last job was Les Mis, and I was there for, well, my kids were growing up. So I have twins who were then 4. And that's why I stayed as long as I did. I was stage manager for 15 months, and then I was company manager for 3.5 years. And it was a brilliant time because that show is just not like any other show. It's not like a leading man in the kick line. It's such an ensemble piece, and it was madly busy. And I got to do the 10th anniversary concert, and then went back after I'd left to do the 25th anniversary concert as show caller, actually. So it's been a big part of my life. And then I did fall into show calling. Literally fell into it the way that people do. I didn't look for it. I knew about it. And I got asked to go by the production manager I'd worked with on this terrible production called Time, the musical with Cliff Richard, which was in the mid 80s. And it was groundbreaking technology, but a terrible story, terrible show. But the production manager worked at Imagination, which was the biggest of and the kind of earliest of the production companies. And that's how I fell into it, really. And didn't quite dare go full-time freelance until late 90s. And that's where I've been ever since.
Wow, what a fantastic beginning. And how much influence does, how much difference does it make having a family that's in that industry? That I mean, you kind of were expected not to do anything else. Is that correct? You guys
Well,
are to
no,
be
I
part
don't
of
think that's really true. I think my dad would have loved me to go to university. He went to Oxford, but that was in the days when you kind of almost bought your way into Oxford. I think it wasn't like it is now. But I was one of the generation who just failed their 11 plus. Now, if that means anything to anyone of my generation, it was a huge thing. And I was really, really gutted that I didn't get into the grammar school. So I ended up going to a secondary, which I totally unappreciated at the time, that my parents had to pay for, but it was a Catholic convent. And I absolutely, totally loathed it. And it was it could not have been more different than my life at home and the theatre life, which I loved. So I was desperate to get out. And my mum said, oh, you've got to do something that will learn some skilling to fall back on, because I think they all sort of thought it would, you're never going to make any money in the theatre. So I did a secretarial course for a year, and then I literally wrote to every repertory company in the country until someone offered me a job. And in the upshot, I've still got the letter. The woman said, you can come to me for this season. I had to be thrown on in non-speaking acting parts. They paid me £5 a week, and my parents gave me £6 a week, and I lived on that. But at the end of the letter, she said, if you are who you think you are, please give my love to your father. So I still got the job because they knew who he was, even though it was only a fiver. But that, got to start somewhere. And I have not regretted it. In latter years, when I was in my 30s, I decided to do what I'd never had the opportunity to do and do a degree. So I did Open University. It took me forever. I had to have breaks for various reasons, but in the end, I did get my degree, and I thought, well, tick that one off. And it was helpful, actually, to give you a sense of holding your own, really, with knowing that you can argue well. There was a great preponderance when I first started in the theatre of trainee theatre directors coming out of university through ATV trainee courses, so television courses that paid for them to go and train to be directors. And they were so arrogant. And you got this sense that if you went to university, you must be incredibly clever and you must know better than anyone else. And it's taken me years to realize that's just not true. But it can make you feel a little insecure, I guess. I was 17 when I started work. I was a child.
Yeah, and I love this concept that you talked about, where you fall into it. That was exactly what happened to me. One day I didn't wake up and say, aha, I'm going to do lasers. One day I walked through a door, saw a laser, and went, oh my God. And I kept going through that door. I never went back. So I think
I still think it's the fact that you can't really do that anymore, because it becomes very difficult to work your way into the theatre industry without going to a proper college now. But I still think that if you get the opportunity to learn through doing, it's brilliant. The only thing I'd say I didn't learn was the stuff that students do learn at Guildhall and LAMDA and stuff now, which is how to build a set and how to run a lighting desk and how you program. But I love lights, but honestly, I've worked in the theatre for so many years and I still don't know one end of the lantern from another. And I think, well, if I was really interested, I'd have found out. So it's not stopped me. It just meant that, you go whichever way suits you. Some people want to be technical, some people want to and go for company management end, just show calling, or company managing, or just show calling. Some people just love to do nothing but show call in theatre and they stay there. It's much better recognised now than it was. It was really thought of when I started as, oh, you must be doing this because you can't act. Why would anyone choose to do this job?
Yes, and I've had those comments where people say to me, what's your job? And then I tell them and they say, and what's your real job? What, are you a student or something?
Well, why would you choose to do something that's working from 10 in the morning till 10 at night? Well, you must be mad.
Yes.
But I think since I've been out kind of more in the real world of the real world, when I say the real world, the business world, with corporate show calling, I've realized that you really cannot buy doing something you love. It's not that common to be in the situation where you are doing something you really love. And if the kind of cost of that is that you're not making piles of money, then that might be a choice. I think in my case, I didn't really realize that there's nothing wrong with money. I think you're brought up in the theatre to feel, well, I was, you're doing it for this kind of, my dad had this, somebody wrote a book about the theatre that he ran it for 20 years in Salisbury, called Putting on Panto to Pay for the Pinter, which was exactly it. You put on the stuff that people want to come and see, and now and again you slip in a play that you think might change their lives, but they wouldn't normally come and see because they don't want to come and see Harold Pinter, they want to see Agatha Christie. So you have this kind of feel that you're, well, it's entertaining, educating, isn't it?
Excellent. Well, that's, I guess you've had, literally hundreds of stories that you could tell over the years and some great experiences, just like me. So what a great introduction to you. So we're just going to take a very, very short break. Right now, okay. I'm talking to Kate Salberg from UK about show calling for conferences and events. Don't go away. We'll be right back. So welcome back. I am joined by our expert, Kate Salberg from UK, and we are talking about show calling for conferences and events. And let's get down to it. So Kate, exactly what is show calling?
So I describe the show caller as the person who has an overall understanding and concept of the whole event, which they glean from the producer. And they are the person who translates that information to the crew to turn what has been a complete jumble of rehearsals into a seamless whole. So you're always looking. The job of the show caller is to make it look as if this thing has been completely rehearsed and everybody knows exactly what they're doing, which absolutely isn't the case, because you never get the opportunity to really rehearse something, very rarely, unless it's something that absolutely requires to have a run through from beginning to end. And I think that my passion about the way that people think of show callers is that I think it's incredibly unfair that they can be regarded as kind of, oh, well, it would be a nice to have if we could have a show caller, because they're on the budget, there's something that perhaps if we could do without, but they're not regarded in the same way that you would think of somebody who's going to come in and operate a lighting desk or a sound desk or a video operation, because you're not using kit. So they think that means that, oh, well, it's only paper and pencil, so we can just ask anyone to do it. And it's so not true, because it's a massively skillful, stressful, complicated job. And to ask someone who's not had any training to do this is bad all round. It's bad for the producer, who's going to be anxious, bad for the client, who might not feel particularly convinced. It's bad for the crew, because all they really want to know is what's coming next. And show calling is much more a case of narrative than it is instruction, really. And it's really bad for the person who's being asked to do it, because if you do that and then you come away feeling deflated and that you haven't done a very good job, it's not a good place to be. So that's why I started the training, to try and cover off this misconception that people have about what the show caller does.
Well, yeah, I mean, I believe I was one of those people who thought it was very simple. You just sit there, and in the opening, I did, 3, 2, 1. I think that's what most people think a show caller is. But what actually is their job? What did they actually do during the show? Okay,
so let's say that let's just, to make this simpler, let's just use an example of a conference that you get booked for. So say this conference is going to be a one-day conference. It's got 3 sessions: before coffee, after lunch, and it's mixed up with a series of different presenters, all using slides. Some of them are doing demos, and a whole different set of complexity of their content. The way the show caller works is they turn up on site probably the day before, or the day before the rehearsal day, and they get briefed by the producer, given a running order, told what is in this show, And then their job is to go off and make sure that the whole crew understand everything that's in this running order, that everything that's required on the running order has been booked, like, are there enough microphones? Did you know that we need this, that, and the other, to make sure that there hasn't been anything lost? And then in rehearsal, your job is to understand from each presenter precisely what they want, what you need them to do for you to make the show work, to make sure that the producer, the client, and the presenter are all happy and clear, and then translate that into a set of cues for the crew so that everything works seamlessly. Now, this is under pressure, always out of order. So in some ways, the most complicated part of the job is not so much what you're doing when that presenter is on stage, but how you make sure that going from A to B, from John to Bert, from so-and-so to so-and-so looks right, looks good, and looks seamless, and isn't just a terrible jumble of someone wandering off and someone else wandering on. The reason why theatre is so incredibly useful as a background to this is that's precisely what you're doing in theatre. You're giving a whole set of cues to a crew, so you know the process. But the massive difference is that you never rehearse anything in a linear order, and also you're not the person upon whom the crew is entirely relying to say go, and they will wait for you. If you were to fall under the table and not give the cues, the show would all still carry on, provided they all know what's next. It's a very different skill set, and one that I think requires massive amount of diplomacy, artistic understanding, knowing how to communicate between a client, the producer, and the producer and the crew. And it's exhausting, but ultimately incredibly collaborative, which is one of the things I love about it most.
All right, so that's a fantastic example of what they do. And just to clarify, the show caller is not the director of the show, are they?
No. So if you look at the two things side by side, in the theatre, you have a producer who is the overall person who actually is putting on this show, like Cameron Mackintosh or Andrew Lloyd Webber. And then you have a director who is the person whose concept, the artistic concept, this whole thing is, who directs the actors into what they want them to do. And obviously another creative team, lighting designer, etc., etc. But in corporate, the producer is the person who will have worked with the production company and the client with the overall concept of this thing, and then transmits the information across to the show caller as to how they want this show to be. So it's similar to being a director in the theatre, but the big difference is that the person who's really responsible for making these decisions in the theatre is the director and the producer of the show, and what the audience might think is neither here nor there. They're going to give them what they think works. But in corporate, the big issue is that you have the client, and the client's paying the bill, and the client's the one who you have to relate to and make sure that they are happy. And it's very difficult sometimes to balance what the client is wanting with what actually works, and the producer having the wherewithal, sometimes the courage, to say no.
That was actually going to be one of my next questions. What is the difference, the major differences between working in theatre and in corporate for show callers?
So the biggest difference is, well, the manifold. If I start with the crew in theatre, the crew in theatre are essentially attached to that show, and you usually have a resident crew who are part of the theatre itself, and then you have crew that are brought in to actually run the show, who are probably booked by the production company. But everything about the show has been decided for the show caller by the director, by the lighting designer, by the artistic director. They will say to them, this is how I want it to be. And then the show caller will call those cues according to what it is that director wants it to be like. And no one on the end of the comms in theatre will ever take a cue unless they hear the word go. They will always just wait. It's imagining that if you're doing a West End show that is there for some time, you're going to have 2 or 3 people who call that show, because it can't just be one. They'd go completely mad. So it has to be a completely standardized show book that everybody uses the same book and everybody calls the cues more or less the same way. And the person on the end of the operation, like for instance, the lighting operator, all of that programming that's done to make the show work happens during the production period, and it's then programmed into the desk. And that operator basically is pushing the buttons. If there was a big problem with the lighting desk, it's quite possible that that person couldn't just sort it. They might have to say, well, we'll have to muddle through and then we'll get someone in to mend the desk tomorrow. Not like that in corporate at all. You think of all of the people that you're giving cues to almost as their own individual little self-running worlds, that as long as they understand what's required next, they will never wait for a go if they know that they should be doing it. They'll just do it, because loads of shows don't have show callers. They're not big enough. You know, you've got to have generally speaking, a show caller's only ever booked for a show that warrants it because it's big and therefore a bit more complicated. And you're working with the crew in a way where you're all working collaboratively to decide what works best, but very often the producer has no concept of how it works technically. And so you're having to kind of be the person who's educating them at the same time as giving the cues to the crew. And that varies massively according to the experience of the producer.
Yeah, so this is interesting, and I'm going to refer back to something you said earlier, which was we don't do rehearsals in a linear way, which is very true of the events that we've been doing over the last 15 or 20 years. Different people come into because I work mainly with corporate events, and you know they all come in at different times, and we have to do the last thing first and the first thing last. The show caller is then the one responsible for kind of pulling that all together, putting it all into an order, and making sure it all goes out at the right time.
Yes, exactly that.
Fantastic.
But it's not just making sure everything's in the right order. It's working out with the crew who are involved what works best. What does it look like? How, you know, what are you going to put on the screen? Are you going to go to camera? Are you not going to go to camera? Are you going to have moving lights when they walk on? Are you going to have music? Are you going to have anything that makes this show look seamless? But in the theatre, you would never, as the show caller, be making those choices. Someone else would be making them for you. In corporate, you're almost invariably making those choices. So it's a far more complex job. So yet again, I say, why on earth would you expect someone who has no knowledge of this or training to be able to do it? It's absolutely bonkers and so wrong.
And that leads to the question, how does someone get into the art of being a show caller?
Well, this is why people who come out of theatre make the best show callers, in my opinion, because they have the grounding, the basic grounding. What's entirely different about the two worlds is that it's not very common in theatre, perhaps a bit more common now, but not that common to have screens or projection or stuff that you're calling to go to a screen. And even if there is stuff like that, it's more than likely programmed into the lighting desk as part of the cue during the production period. So it then just becomes a lighting cue that makes this projection come on. Something complicated like network at the National, for instance, you know, that's full of just camera work. I would suspect that, I don't know, but I would suspect that in a show like that, the vision mixer and the camera people are completely their own department doing their own thing, and they're rehearsed just like another member of the artistic team. So for instance, if I use an example of the one kind of theatre-y thing I did over the last few years was a arena tour of Jesus Christ Superstar with Tim Minchin, and there was a lot of live camera in that, and that became, they were doing their own thing. They were rehearsed just as another member of the show. So you wouldn't be calling those cameras, you're just calling whether cameras on screen or not on screen. And it's kind of similar in corporate. You know, the vision mixer who calls the cameras is his own artistic director of the cameras. The lighting operator is often the designer, or certainly works with the designer and is making these choices themselves about what looks good and what doesn't look good. And the sound person is making these choices, and the show caller is simply the person who's letting them know this is what's next. And they do it kind of when they know it's the right moment to do it, unless there's something so specific that has to be called precisely as I call it, because it's a big theatrical moment and you have to wait for my go. But generally you'd use a generic term like presenter state, which means sound put up the microphone when they know it's the right moment, lighting put lights up when they know it's the right moment, and you're just saying presenter state go, and everybody just does it when it's the right thing. So much more generic.
And is this something that anyone can do? And what makes a great show caller?
So sorry, you asked me how'd you get in the first place. So I think this is the biggest problem about the corporate world, is it's really, really hard to get people who want to do it to have the opportunity to come in and listen and follow, because it's always massively pressurized. There is so little time. And if you ask a member of the production team, could we have another set of comms? Could we have another table? Could we have another? It's not always going to be the most welcome thing. It's also, I would say, a bit hopeless for the person who's following it, unless they're really aware of how this thing has been arrived at and what it is you're calling. It's a bit like, I'd use the example of me going into to do the Phantom 25th concert, which I called, 25 years before, for a few months, and I had to go in and refresh, and they said, oh, come and watch it in the prompt corner, you can bring the show book. But it made no sense to me, because I couldn't have the opportunity to really focus on what cue he was calling and what he was saying and why, because I hadn't had time to do the study, and there wasn't room in that prompt corner to look at it properly, and there were people rushing on and off stage, and you have to know what it is that you're trying to learn. So this is part of the reason for me to be doing the training and make little videos that give an example of how it sounds when you show call. But I'd honestly say the best possible way to learn is to try to start as a room manager or a stage manager, so that you have the opportunity to be on site, to see everything working, to ask people questions, to listen in, and then find out how you build on that. The training I do helps people understand completely the concept and the differences between theatre and corporate, and how you're calling everything is to do with the screen. Everything that you're calling in corporate is to do with the screen, or was before virtual, which isn't to do with the screen at all at the moment. But that will come back, I'm sure. So it's really hard. And I think it would be extremely good if production companies could invest a bit in giving people the opportunity to do nothing but sit with a show caller for those 2-3 days, if they want someone to learn about it. Because you could say to a Progco, oh, I'd really love to learn about it, but they're so busy running around doing stuff that they can't really focus on what's happening. So you need to focus on nothing but that if you want to learn, really.
So let's talk a little bit about your training courses that you have. What is the objective and the format? How do people get hold of these courses?
So the courses I built, the reason I built the courses is because I've been running face-to-face training for ages, and mostly really aimed at theatre stage management who might be interested in moving into corporate and want to understand the differences. And so after a day's training, they'll know, God, this isn't for me, it's just too stressful, or I think I could have a go at that. But it's also aimed at producers and junior producers to understand what it is that show callers do, and how they can help us by giving us materials in a really useful way. And to understand that it's not ever intended to say, oh, look, why don't you become a show caller? It's intended to make producers understand why it's so important to use show callers, and also to invest in, they have to call shows themselves sometimes. Producers absolutely have to. And so it's to give them the sense of, oh, I am doing it the right way, and there is a better, so I understand what happens with these presets and what you're talking about when you're talking about screen switchers and what's the normal terminology, so that so I understand when I hear these things what you're talking about. So that's the purpose. And the face-to-face ones obviously came to an end with COVID. So I had already actually built them online, and they're on teachable.com. And I've also built some training courses on Udemy, which are for students, stage management students and event management students. So the purpose for the event management students is very much to understand the situation of what it's like actually in working on the production, in the room, during rehearsals, and making it live, because I understand from those students, they don't get a lot of that training in their courses. It's a lot more to do with marketing, client management, making margins, those sort of things. So, and it's alarming for a junior producer to be faced with a seriously grown up presenter who wants to do something that they don't think is going to work, to have the balls to say, we can't do that. So that's the purpose. And and as a show caller, I mean, I'm long in the tooth and I'm used to talking to people, so I don't mind at all bowling in and being the kind of pit bull terrier for the show caller and explaining to the presenter and the client why we can't do it like this, but let me show you a way we can. This is the basic theatre training. You never, ever say no. You just say, let's find another way that will work for everybody, because you're sometimes in a situation where you're on comms and the whole crew is screaming down your headset, you can't do that. They want to do what? That's going to look absolute rubbish. And you're out the front thinking, yes, I know, but I've got to find a different way of saying it than just telling them what you're shouting at me down the comms. That's never going to work. So diplomacy is really useful.
Yeah, excellent. And I will put links beneath this video to your courses on Udemy and Teachable so that people can get hold of them. In fact, that's how we met. I was actually looking through Udemy and I came across your courses, and here we are.
It's been interesting, actually, because it's gone much more to America and Australia than I would ever have even thought had any interest over there. And I have had some quite interesting conversations with people in the States. And I actually ran a free webinar about the differences about stage management in the UK and in the US, which was fascinating. Just terminology. We all call things different things. We call it a clicker, they call it a pickle. We call them comfort monitors, they call them DSMs, and downstage monitor. And DSM in the UK means deputy stage manager, which is the person who calls the show. So it's just funny. It's just fun.
Yeah, brilliant. I must admit, when I came over to the Philippines, I had my fun with translations as well.
I'm sure.
Excellent. Well, we're going to take another quick break. I've been here with Kate Salberg talking about show calling primarily for conferences and events. Don't go away, because we're going to be back with some other aspects to Kate's life. So stay right here. So welcome back to Argon TV. I am here with our expert show caller. She's Kate Salberg from UK, and we've been talking about show calling. And we're going to switch over now a little bit into something else that Kate has been working with, and it's about storytelling. And there's a wonderful, wonderful quote I heard recently. It goes along the lines of, there's nothing quite so sad as an untold story. So, Kate, what is this part of your life that's separate from the show calling? What are you doing here?
So I trained 4 years ago with a company called Animas in transformational coaching for change. And I did it entirely pragmatically because I wanted something that I could go on doing forever. When I stopped show calling, when I just get too exhausted, well, the traveling's not happening now, but the travelling was driving me demented. So I've used lockdown to really take this forward to the sort of coaching that I really want to do, because perversely, I don't really want to work with corporate clients. I really want to work with people who may be slightly individuals, who may well be in the corporate world themselves and just want to make a change. But it's to do with having the courage to see that you can do whatever you want with your life. And the reason that the storytelling's come into it is because I've found that there's a huge relationship between theatre and coaching in respect of everybody's living a story that they're telling themselves. This is a story that they need to live, and this is where I am, and this is why I'm doing it, and not seeing that it is possible to change, and that the familiar, even though it may be not very comfortable, not very happy, is familiar, and it's easier staying there than it is wondering about whether to take that step over the threshold into something new. And so I've been coached myself, which I found immensely useful. And come up with this tell the story coaching, which is essentially, you know, what's the story, what's your story, and then how do you want to tell it? Do you want to put it out on the internet? Do you want to do a Facebook Live? Do you want to do something where you're feeling overwhelmed at the thought of presenting? So I'm kind of mixing together all my theatre, working with presenters work with this new coaching, and it's all just like a lovely sort of come together in a place where I just feel everything works, with me being completely authentically me, but using the skills that I've learned over the years about telling a story, not just putting out piles of slides, but tell me your story. And it's just really, really enjoyable, and particularly because you see people, you know, the scales fall from their eyes and they realize, God, I can do this if I choose to do it. And it's partly also the other thing about the theatre is it's really useful to sort of get into character when you're trying to deal with something that's difficult. A little bit like making a phone call for someone else rather than yourself, just is easier because you're removing that emotional immediacy from it. And so getting into the sort of character that you want to be in, which is part of you, but just the part that's useful, I found just so enjoyable. So that's what I'm trying to kind of mix in with what I'm doing with show calling. I don't want to leave show calling because I love it and I love the collaboration, but I also love this new world.
Yeah, and I think that's brilliant, this idea that you have with the storytelling. I've always thought like how fantastic it would be to run my life like a movie. Like I have a director and I have a show caller who tells me, okay, go to the gym, go on the diet. And I'm the leading character in my movie. And who would be my leading lady? Who would be my supporting cast? What would I do? Where would I go? How would my movie finish?
It is literally that. It is literally looking at where you are today and thinking, okay, so well, if this was a story I was telling and I'm kind of halfway through it, actually, how do I want it to end? And if I want it to end the way I want it to end, what do I need to put into this story? Who do I need in the story? And what do I need to do? And just look on it as a story, because it's just incredibly enabling to then look on it dispassionately instead of this kind of clenched stomach fear thing that you might get when you think about making a change. And it's the fact that when you see people change, it's so empowering. I hate that word really because it's used so much like inspirational, but you know what I mean. It's like you can do this stuff and the world isn't going to crash around your ears.
And everyone has everyone has a story. And you were telling me earlier how wonderful some of the people are that you're meeting.
Amazing people. And their story, you know, what's so extraordinary about it is that none of them see themselves as having an extraordinary story, because they're just in the moment of worrying about what to do next. And when you say to them, but listen, you know, you came from here, you learned another language, you did this, you did that, you dealt with all that. Do you not think you should actually just say to yourself, well, yeah, actually, I have done quite a lot? Because one tends to just think, well, I did that, now I've got to move on with the next problem. And it helps to look at things in a it's almost like just daydream into what you want to do and allow your subconscious to do the work for you of, oh, that's a good idea, I hadn't thought of that. Just have fun. It's just having fun. It removes this pressure. And I think the show calling work, which I do love, is immensely tiring. You know, one thing I was going to bring up to you that is so different about the virtual show calling, which really struck me when I was doing a job at Creative Technology, they were using their studios, is that when you're show calling in virtual, you're basically sitting next to the vision mixer in the same sort of location that usually the show crew are in during the show, behind a screen. So when you're behind that screen and you're in this big row of crew, you're kind of remote from what's happening the other side of the screen, where the client, the producer, the show caller are wrangling like hell all day to try and get everything done. You know, we're running late and the rehearsals are then, how are we going to fit all this in? And you're just completely exhausted. But at the back of that screen, if you're doing auto cue, you could be sitting reading a book for 4 hours until suddenly you hear your name called and you think, oh, I better concentrate for a bit. So what tends to happen with the show caller at the end of the day, when the final rehearsal finally finishes at 7:30 at night or 8 o'clock, suddenly all this crew come out to you and say, what time's breakfast? What time am I getting this? What time? And you just want to put a big thing on your head saying, I don't know, because you literally just stopped. And this sense when you're virtual show calling that you're at a remove from the intensity of doing all this stuff live. And I mean, I don't like it, because I think we're really missing that personal, interpersonal connection and presenter live. But it is less stressful, I think. But I can't wait for the stress to come back, really.
Oh yes, I miss those events. But I had to laugh earlier when you said you wanted to move away from corporate. My whole profession in the industry, in the laser industry and show production, has been with corporate, and I absolutely 100% agree with you. I really pull my hair out.
I think the reason I feel it personally, and it's entirely a personal thing, you know, if you've got a business background, if you've got a business background, or you're somebody who deals with strategy, I completely get it that you can work with corporate people and feel on top of it. For me, it's much more to do with the personal driver of the person and the personal change they want to make, that I just wouldn't feel that I really was well equipped to make any of those I just judgments or advice. Well, you don't advise when you're coach, you just kind of reflect. But I sort of feel that in the corporate world, there's a sense of doing corporate social responsibility because it's good for business, not so much because you really truly are driven and believe it. And that's what I'm after. I'm after the people who want to help other people, enable the enablers to enable another enabler to enable another enabler, etc. So it's all good.
Well, I absolutely know that we could talk for about another 3 or 4 hours about this subject, and especially the storytelling. And obviously we can't do that. But if someone wanted to get in touch with you to just ask questions or talk to or book I see you have a strategy call on your website as well. If they want to get in touch with you about show calling or about your storytelling, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Well, any way. If you find Kate Salberg at Gmail's my email, but you'll find me on any of those websites. Tell the Story Coaching. I've got a Facebook business page for show caller training. If you just type me into Google, you'll find me somewhere.
Great.
Quite easily, I'm sure.
I'll hunt those links down and I'll put them beneath this video. So if you want to get in touch with Kate, now you can.
Brilliant. Really nice to talk to you. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, I want to thank you for being here, Kate, and spending the time and just sharing your expert knowledge with us. I'm sure the audience will really, really appreciate you.
You're welcome.
I hope you come again and talk to us about your virtual show calling, and maybe talk again about the storytelling sometime.
Great. Thanks a lot. Have a good day.
Awesome.
Or evening.
Yes. Thank you very much for being here, everybody. It's been an awesome journey. We've been talking about show calling for conferences, events with Kate Salberg, and I look forward to seeing you all again very soon in another episode of Argon TV. Until then, have an awesome day.